Wait. I know you're looking at the title of this video and thinking this is going to be me beating a dead horse, but trust me, this will be informative and will actually provide value instead of just dunking on Carol Danvers for 20 minutes. Yes, it would be easy and some of that is in this video, but trust me, there's some good stuff in here. Just watch, I promise. We completed the Dark mission and the Neutral mission. Now we have to complete the Hero mission. Before we get started, if you'd like to support me and check out a novel from an indie author, hit the link in the description and take a look at my sci-fi military series Blur Havoc. Or if you'd like, check out my Patreon, Subscribestar, or affiliate links. If anything, a like and subscription are enough. It would be much appreciated. Now, Carol Danvers is quite the divisive character in the MCU. Ask anyone and you'll probably get a varying degree of opinions on her. Some may say that she's powerful and impactful. Some will say she's mid and bland but nothing to write home about or complain about. And then you get some who loathe her and point out all of the flaws in her character writing. Guess which party I'm in? Carol is a heavily flawed character for all of the wrong reasons. She comes across as a bloodthirsty, confused, prideful, and cynical hero in her 3 full appearances in the MCU. And standing next to a character like, say, Steve Rogers, Carol seems like the kind of person Steve would butt heads with constantly. So since this is the 3rd verse, it'll be the same as the 1st. Let's break down the pillars needed to make a good hero, which, to be honest, is a lot harder than making a villain, and as you'll see, there's a lot of synergy between these aspects. Here are the 5 attributes of a hero. The avatar of virtue, code and ethics and the source of it, sense of duty, the suffering, and temperance. Let's break these down since some of these sound pretty esoteric and abstract. The avatar of a virtue. What virtue does your hero epitomize? What value or trait are they meant to personify? Is it diligence, justice, freedom, truth? Whatever it is, your hero has to model their actions based on following this virtue. If you're so inclined, your hero can be the avatar of multiple virtues if they work well together. Just remember that you're making a hero here, so the virtue should be something positive. Code and ethics. What are the lines your hero will not cross no matter what? If they had a gun to their head and were told, either you break your code or I shoot you right between the eyes, what is the one thing that would make them respond, then shoot me? Do they have a no-kill rule? Do they have a religion? Do they only kill? Are they sober and straight-laced? Once you figure that out, then you need to explain why they have that code. Where did it come from? Why do they hold it so close to the heart? Sense of duty. This one's pretty binary. Does your character follow their code of ethics and virtue when they have every reason not to? Even when their friends, family, and lover are all telling them to fold on their values, do they hold true to themselves? The suffering. Your hero has to suffer. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules, it's just the way it is. This one is often in tandem with the first 2. One of the reasons your character has to suffer is so that they are pushed to break their code, but their code has to be stronger than the intensity of the suffering. There's a reason the Metal Gear Solid 1 canon ending is the one where you don't give in to Ocelot's torture. The other reason is that a hero who suffers in their origin makes the payoff of the hero's final form, so to speak, much more satisfying. Temperance. Not of the hero, of the writer. Are you controlling yourself when it comes to the positive or cool aspects of your hero? Are you using the negative emotions and moments or suffering in moderation? Is the experience of your hero well balanced, or are they either too well off or perpetually tortured? To keep this comparison fair, I will only use Steve's first full 3 appearances versus Carol's first 3 full appearances. First, what virtue are these characters avatars of? Well, Steve is easy. It's justice. He always tries to be fair and fight for what is right. In Captain America 1, Steve has every personal reason to let the plane with the bombs destroy American cities so that he can survive. But that wouldn't be just or fair to the innocent lives in his country. So he, as far as he knew, sacrificed himself to save millions of lives. He also knows that it's not necessarily fair to condemn Bucky to death for actions he had no control over in Winter Soldier. Bucky fell down a cliff, then was recovered and brainwashed into a mind-controlled attack dog by Hydra. If you want, you can also include truth as another virtue, since his actions in Winter Soldier show us that he cares more about revealing the truth behind Hydra's takeover of S.H.I.E.L.D. than his own life. There are other examples in later films, but again, trying to keep this fair. Carol, on the other hand, I was initially going to say she doesn't have one, but Carol's virtue actually seems to be vindictiveness. I was scouring through all of Carol's actions throughout her 3 movies, and the one moment that stuck out the most to me was in the Marvels, where she flies to the Kree homeworld and destroys the Supreme Intelligence with absolutely zero foresight towards the consequences. She never thinks about how destroying a super smart AI that basically handled all logistics towards life on Hala would create a civil war that resulted in a planet-wide holocaust. She busts into the lair of the Supreme Intelligence and brutally slaughters a bunch of people on her way to it, including caving in the fucking ceiling on Dar-Ben. If Dar-Ben didn't have plot armor, this would have fucking killed her. Mind you, this happened directly after the events of the first Captain Marvel, so this comes across as a bull-headed retaliation against the Supreme Intelligence for manipulating her rather than a rational decision made for strategic purposes. Then there's the scene where she decides to steal a guy's motorcycle because he told her to smile. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but I can't get over how that scene is shot like Carol is the victim of an assault or something. It's just fucking funny to me. But anyway, part of the definition of vindictive is a strong or unreasoning desire for revenge. Stealing a guy's bike because he said you should smile is not a good reason. Next, we have code and ethics. With Steve, one of the lines he refuses to cross is sacrificing the lives of others or letting others die when he has the power to do something. He is perfectly fine with sacrificing his own life for a cause, but he will never volunteer someone else for the slaughter. Not only is there the aforementioned plane crash in Captain America 1, but there's also the moment earlier when he jumps on what he believes is a live grenade to save everyone else's lives. Then in the climax of Winter Soldier, he knows Bucky can't control himself, so he willingly allows Bucky to beat him within an inch of his life because he can't bring himself to kill Bucky when he cannot consent to the actions his body is taking. He simply refuses to allow innocent lives to be lost if he can help it. Upon further analysis, I believe the reason why Steve is such a stalwart for the innocent, the weak, and those who have been taken advantage of is because he was there himself before he took the serum. Carol, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have a code. She steals from people who say things she doesn't like. She abandons Alatna and her green card husband to Doom when she brought the fight against Dar-Ben to them in the first place, and she allows innocent lives to be stranded on Tarnax and makes no attempt to collect them. That last one is especially bizarre since the obvious layup from a writing perspective would have been for Carol to try all she could to save everyone, but she just didn't have enough time. That way, it shows that she values the Skrulls' lives. What makes all of this so painful is that there is no logic or reason to any of these actions. Carol just responds to situations the way the writer wants her to respond to these situations. The writers will consistently have her be described as a beacon of hope when she's a thieving, cynical, hopeless, bloodthirsty, and careless jackass. For a sense of duty, this is pretty self-explanatory for Steve. He owes nothing to Bucky and he has every reason to abandon him and condemn him to death, but he doesn't because Bucky is his best friend and one of the few people in his life who didn't judge him because of how scrawny he used to be. And again, pretty self-explanatory for Carol as well. She clearly felt no sense of duty for the people of Tarnax as she abandoned large swaths of them with little to no reluctance. I must reiterate for that one guy in the comments, it's the little to no reluctance part I have a problem with. But also, she felt no sense of duty to return to Earth to see Monica Rambeau after her mother Maria passed away while she was blipped. For a girl she considered her niece, she didn't seem to really care about her all that much. The suffering. God, Steve has suffered. Before he even became Cap, he was constantly bullied, picked on, looked over, and beat up over his small size. Then when he became Cap, his best friend seemingly died and he was frozen in the Arctic for 40 years and was unable to be with the woman he had fallen in love with. He wakes up as a man out of his own time and a stranger in his own country with almost none of his family, friends, or brothers in arms alive anymore. Then in Winter Soldier, his best friend turns out to be alive, but he's been brainwashed by Hydra and is now trying to kill him. He also finds out that the government of his country that he loves has been taken over by said Hydra, and the amount of people he could trust was dwindling fast. And again, this isn't even counting the things that he went through after Winter Soldier. Carol, I'm sure you've heard this before, but Carol doesn't really suffer that much, to be honest. Mar-Vell was a lady she didn't really know that well, and she died, but the first film makes it seem like Carol cared about her a lot, despite the minimal screen time Mar-Vell had, and the fact that she wasn't even really mentioned by Carol in the sequel. Maria dies, yes, but her death was off-screen, and Carol wasn't even there when it happened. She lost her memories but promptly got them back. She barely missed any time on Earth before she regained her memories. She is never seen dwelling on her choices or any of the setbacks she has because they barely even classify as setbacks when everyone around her tells her she's awesome and amazing, like in the conversation after Alatina falls in the Marvels. There is no moment where Carol has a "I fucked up" realization and everyone says, whether to her face or to themselves, "Yeah, you kinda did." The closest point I can give Carol is that she was manipulated by the Supreme Intelligence, but even that isn't too special since everyone in the Kree Empire was. And lastly, temperance. Steve's strengths don't necessarily lie in his power set. Yes, he's super strong and more durable than a human should be, but his strength comes from his strong intuition and leadership skills. His ability to keep a level head and take control of a horrible situation makes him the de facto leader of the Avengers. However, Steve isn't perfect. He has a tendency to be idealistic. He threw himself at Bucky at great risk to his own well-being with not so much as a mildly thought-out plan to break his programming. Bucky remembering Steve wasn't even due to Steve's plan. It was seriously dumb luck that Bucky didn't pummel him into paste. This next part requires a bit of knowledge on US history to understand. Steve also has an initial disdain for Tony because of his insubordination towards S.H.I.E.L.D. and Avengers. This could primarily be because he still has an idealistic view of the government and its agencies. Remember, Steve was not around during the post-Cold War era. During World War II, the general sentiment of people in the US towards the government was the idea that the government could do no wrong. The American forces and institutions were there to help and protect the American people. During the Cold War and Vietnam War, many U.S. intelligence agencies grew to power, and much of their clandestine activities would come out later, and many citizens would revile the secretive and morally questionable actions of the U.S. government. Steve would have missed the country's gradual transition into general sentiment of distrust in the government. Tony even lampshades this when he says,
"Yet you're confused about why they didn't want you around."
An intelligence organization that fears intelligence, historically not awesome.
Steve badgers Tony into simply following orders, but when both Tony and Banner insist that S.H.I.E.L.D. is hiding something, Steve seems to visibly struggle to comprehend that his government would hide things from people. Carol Danvers was written by people who have absolutely zero restraint. It can all be summed up with this line from Maria Rambeau.
"You were smart and funny and a huge pain in the ass. and you were the most powerful person I knew.
You're probably thinking, but she called Carol a huge pain in the ass. Yeah, but this is during a speech where she's praising Carol for who she was to her. Clearly the pain in the ass comment was not meant to be an insult, it was meant to highlight how determined and insistent Carol is to her. To her, Carol is the determinator and nothing else. The character that never gives up and never surrenders on their goal, no matter their circumstances. While yes, this is admirable, she has no detrimental qualities to her personality. Even the things we find abhorrent in her are considered positive traits in universe. Her pettiness towards Jan Rog is depicted as strong and magnanimous. Her theft of a random guy's motorcycle is viewed as witty. Her abandonment of the scrolls on Tarnax is viewed as practical. The writers view Carol through the veil of delusion. Now, this is the hardest thing to capture in a hero of any kind, but I think about this one thing when I work on heroes. Being a good and moral person is not about what you get in return. It's all about doing the right thing simply because you believe it is the right thing to do. And my wording was very deliberate because you'll come across heroes who don't agree with other heroes on what the right thing to do is. Take, for example, the rooftop argument between Daredevil and Punisher. Both agree on who is evil, but they disagree on the right way to bring them to justice. Batman and Red Hood have a similar dynamic. Another example is Steve and Tony's disagreement on the Sokovia Accords, the safety of government surveillance versus the risk of freedom. Not to sound like a Reddit philosopher, but in the world of fiction, morality is indeed subjective. Not all characters agree on what is right or wrong. And to round out the trilogy, we're going to analyze one of my characters again to show how I apply my own techniques. You'd think I'd talk about that handsome devil known as Book Alastor, but from a design perspective, Alastor was actually not designed to be a hero. He plays a much more dynamic and interesting role in the trilogy that I don't want to spoil. To be honest, most of my characters, even the good guys, don't really qualify as typical heroes, but one character does. Today, we'll be analyzing everyone's favorite editor, Isabella Perea. Isabella Perea goes on a much different journey compared to the rest of the cast. While most of the characters of Blur Havoc are pre-established forces in the universe, Isabella's story in the trilogy is effectively an origin story. Let's talk about her attributes. Isabella's virtue is the same as Steve Rogers: justice. She's all about treating others fairly and not giving in to negative emotions just because it would feel good to do so. She is made fun of by her peers for trying to take on a rogue state agent named Leah Emery by herself. And to quote Nick Fury, she was hopelessly and hilariously outgunned. Leah managed to choke Isabella with her own arm. It was the equivalent of Jimmy Olsen trying to fistfight Batman. Since then, she's been made fun of and effectively bullied for this incident because her coworkers memed on her for indirectly causing a civil war, which isn't true, but we all know how dunking on people works. Because of this, she tries her best to be as fair as possible to other people since no one wanted to be fair to her at the time. Isabella's code of ethics is that she does not believe in senseless violence. She absolutely refuses to support or approve of any unnecessary violence, such as revenge. Once someone is no longer a threat, she stands down and attempts to arrest them. She does not believe it is her place to be the executioner in combat. This also puts her at slight odds with her allies, but because of her optimistic disposition, her morals have a tendency to rub off on the likes of her bestest friend in the whole wide world, Rise. Don't tell him I said that, he likes to act tough. Isabella has a sense of duty when it comes to cleaning up her mistakes. She could easily allow those who are more equipped, powerful, and experienced to clean it up for her, but she was raised to take accountability for her actions and errors. When given the opportunity to apprehend Leia again, she has a natural sense of anxiety, of course, but she accepts the task. She also has a sense of duty towards her friends and allies. For reasons I do not want to spoil, she exhibits great concern for Book Alastor during the events of Blur Havoc 3, to the point where she asks Rise to speak to Alastor in private. This is despite the fact that she's only known Book Alastor for about 12 hours at that point. As stated earlier, Isabella was relentlessly mocked for attempting to apprehend Leia without authorization. She was also demoted for her insubordination and basically restricted to being a security guard for an entire year. She was basically alone in a city far away from her family with no friends for the majority of the trilogy. She also got her ass whooped by Leia twice before joining Blur Havoc. The second time, Isabella lost one of her shoulders and needed to get it replaced with a synthetic prosthetic. She also gets thrown into a team of top brass at Blur Havoc known as Vanguard Team, and is the least experienced soldier/fighter in the team, thus thrusting her into high-stress, high-danger situations against the worst threats the PMC has to face. And finally, Isabella's strong virtue, moral compass, and contagious empathy are all strongly countered by her aforementioned lack of experience and training. In Blur Havoc 3, she is placed in a medic/support role because of this, and can easily be overpowered if left alone. She's the heart of the team, not the brawn. Now that I've completed the trilogy, I can fully explain how this works. No matter if you're writing a hero or villain, they need to be a character first. Start with making them a character first, then use the traits of a hero or villain to round them out and make them into whatever allegiance you want them to be. And on the topic of anti-heroes, they really aren't that complicated. Make a hero who behaves more like a villain on the surface. But the one thing you can't do is have your hero fail to uphold their code. If they can fail in that, what's so spectacular about them? Why should we view them as heroes and not just regular ass dudes? The virtue, code, ethics, and morals are the difference between us normal people and heroes that people look up to. Take a look at Age of Extinction Optimus for an example of a hero who just throws their ethics out of the window. But in regards to Steve Rogers versus Carol Danvers, Steve is the epitome of what a hero should be, while Carol's heroism is an informed attribute, something we are told, but the reality is very different from the text. As for this series, I will start to move away from character writing to talk about everyone's favorite part of the process, structure. Sounds fun, doesn't it? Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.